Hi. So, if you were listening to this, then that is a pretty good sign that the world did not end and the rapture did not come. Welcome to Christianish. My name is Keshia Rice. I am a dating coach, I'm a hypnotherapist, and this is the podcast for women who have Bibles but don't necessarily have boundaries. And the whole concept of this podcast has really converged this week, right? So I don't know how much time you spend online, but there has been a whole thing with groups of people being convinced that the rapture was happening this week. Now, according to all of the posts online, particularly on TikTok or on Rapture Talk, which I have spent way too much time watching these videos, there was a South African pastor who prophesied that the end of the world was going to happen on September 23rd and 24th. And it led to like widespread panic and obsession with people predicting that the rapture was going to happen and that Christians were going to be, caught up in the air to go to heaven and be with God. And I have seen all sorts of crazy stuff online. I've seen people quitting their jobs because they were convinced that after Tuesday, the 23rd, they would no longer be here. And, I'm telling you now, this podcast is coming out on the 24th, and I waited until it is currently the evening of the 23rd. I waited late to record for this reason, because I kind of wanted to see all of the reaction happening online, right? Before I made this post. But yeah, people were quitting their jobs, selling their homes and cars, and giving money to the sinners that were going to be left behind. Just all of this crazy stuff. People making completely, really drastic life decisions. And I was thinking about, why was I so caught up in this? Because yes, I grew up Pentecostal. I'm a preacher's kid, and I'm also a millennial, so the Left Behind series was a thing, right? And also, I studied religion in college, so I also know that the whole concept of a rapture is not biblical, right? A lot of what some Christians think of when they hear rapture, a lot of the stuff that you see or heard about in like the Left Behind series in particular, it comes from this preacher from like the 1830s, I believe, 1840s, which either way is 1800s, way after the Bible was written, right? But also, I think one of the things that struck me about this was seeing all this frenzy, seeing all this panic and desperation. I'm trying to be very careful how I say this, but it made me think about the desperation that I see in a lot of single women, a lot of single, particularly Christian women that I have encountered, that I have worked with, and their anxiety about being in a relationship, or the fact that they are not currently in a relationship. And this idea that, if they don't get married soon, life is going to be incomplete. And I wanted to talk about this. I wanted to talk about the fact that as Christian women, we are called to be hopeful. We are called to be discerning, and we are called to be sober minded. And that is the case whether you are talking about some random preacher online predicting the apocalypse or you are longing to be in a relationship. So, again, I'm going to be pausing a lot as I talk through this because I don't want to call out any particular woman or make you feel bad. But again, if you've listened to me for any amount of time, you know that one of my favorite Bible verses is, God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind. And I always emphasize that sound mind. I really do think that we have to take a lot of accountability in our mindset and in how we think. And sometimes that involves hearing some uncomfortable truths. And sometimes hearing these and realizing, okay, I'm not where I should be, but I'm not that bad, right? This really doesn't apply to me. Or sometimes realizing, like, hey, I didn't think this is a big deal, but this is something I need to work on. So it is in that spirit that I'm coming to you with this. But yes, watching all of the viral Rapture Talk videos that I've seen in the past couple of days, it made me think of how easy it is to let even good desires like marriage, because I am obviously not slamming marriage, right? I'm a dating coach. I am also a married woman, and I love my husband. So I think marriage is beautiful. But we can allow those things to turn into obsession. And when I saw the frenzy, the urgency that some people were approaching Rapture Talk with, it made me think about the anxiety and the obsession that I see some women fall into when they're single and they long for a relationship. So let's talk about what some of these parallels are. One is the fear of missing out, right? So you had all of these people like in a frenzy to prepare to sell their homes or to do forgiveness, to repent, to get right with God before the rapture happened because they did not want to be, quote unquote, left behind, right? And it's the same in the world of dating and relationships, that sometimes women will look around and you're single and you're seeing other women around you start to settle down, get into relationships, and you feel like you're falling behind. Like, that is a major part of how I ended up becoming a dating coach, right? I was having a quarter life crisis, and as part of that quarter life crisis, when I looked around, it seemed like all my friends, their lives were falling into place, and mine was a hot mess, right? And it took a lot of things. It took me seeing a coach myself, took some therapy, some shadow work, and it took making some decisions, not allow myself to fall into that anxiety and that place of desperation, but allowing myself to really fall into determination, right? Optimism and purpose, and using that to really create the life that I wanted. But again, instead, I do see women sometimes falling into that sense of urgency and creating unnecessary anxiety in their lives to make decisions that come from a place of fear instead of a place of wisdom. Like getting into a bad relationship just to say that they're in a relationship. There's also this whole idea of a time pressure, right? So people thought that, as I'm recording this, there was a lot of talk that the world was supposedly ending. The rapture was happening today on Tuesday. There are some people saying that it could happen tomorrow on Wednesday, the day that this podcast comes out. So we'll see. But that deadline made some people feel like there was no time to waste, and that they had to make some pretty radical life changes in order to be a part of this opportunity, right? In order to, quote unquote, get right with God so they could be part of the rapture. And you see this with single women in relationships, right? The whole your biological clock is ticking. That you have to find someone now before it's too late. Before it's too late for you to have kids. Before it's too late for you to have the marriage that you want. Or even this feeling that after a certain age, you're going to be less desirable, which I find hilarious, honestly. There are men with mics who have some unfortunate podcasts who will try to convince you that you've hit the wall at like 20, 25, whatever. And just personal experience. One, with a 3 in front of my age, I personally feel more attractive, more loved, honestly, sexier now than I was in my 20s. I also still, get hit on and asked out and everything. Obviously, I have to, you know, let people know that I'm married. But that happens. But also, I was actually just discussing this with someone earlier today about, I have an aunt who's in her 80s and single. She's a widow. Her husband passed away a little while ago, and she has no shortage of suitors. She, in her 80s, she is still dating. She is still desired. She's still wanted. It's like not a thing. The whole at a certain age is too late, right? But yeah, I see this time pressure that so many women put themselves on, and it leads them to panic. It leads them to be impulsive, to date the wrong person, to compromise their values, and to settle for less than God's best, right? There's also this whole idea of your identity and that being at stake. So, all of these people talking about the rapture have turned into a whole thing of the saved people who are going to be caught up in the air with Jesus and who are leaving this earth for good versus the unsaved people who are going to be, again, to use the book series and eventually go to a movie series as well, who are going to be left behind, right? And this whole thing of whether or not you're going to be left behind or whether you are one of the chosen ones. And you see this play out with women when it comes to dating and relationships as well. That there are a lot of single women who can get caught up in the idea of being in a relationship to the point where you feel like you're left behind, and the women who are in relationships, particularly women who are married, that they're the chosen ones and that something is off or wrong with you, which couldn't be further from the truth, right? There's also this whole idea of like overreacting to the external things around us. The Bible talks about how important it is for us to be like in the world, but not of the world, right? Like we exist in the everyday world. You know, if you are a Christian woman, the fact that you love Jesus and all of that doesn't keep you from having to go to school, having to go to work, have a job, doesn't keep you from having friends and a social life, seeing things on the news, like all of that, right? But there's a difference between having those things and having an earthly experience. There's a difference between that and allowing yourself to just be so caught up and consumed by the things that the rest of the world consumes itself with. And you've seen this a lot with Rapture Talk. You've seen so many people, like, once there was this prophecy that the world was going to be ending today, they were going out looking for every single sign to confirm that. People were showing pictures of license plates and billboards that they said confirmed that the rapture was happening. And again, I see this with some of the single women that I work with, that instead of allowing dating to be a fun experience and just that an experience, something that they learn from and grow from, they come to me wanting to analyze every single glance from a man, every single word that a potential partner says, every text message that he sends. And by putting your hopes on a relationship, by putting a relationship on a pedestal, you're only allowing yourself to become more anxious. And you're also, again, allowing your judgment to be clouded. So it's natural to desire a relationship, and it's good to desire a relationship. I firmly believe that we grow through relationships. You know, all of our relationships, whether that is family, friends, coworkers, or if you own a business, clients, like, you know, I believe that we grow through those things. And I believe we especially grow through romantic relationships. There's just something about having a partner, a romantic partner, that allows for levels of growth that you don't get in other relationships. But again, putting that desire on a pedestal can be draining. It can be emotionally, spiritually, and relationally damaging. It causes you to make really harmful choices. And when you allow that romantic longing to become desperation, you compromise your values, because in your rush to just find someone, you start to overlook the red flags, or you start to ignore your own personal boundaries. You'll stay in a relationship that isn't healthy or that isn't aligned with your values just because you're afraid of being alone. It causes you to disconnect from God, because when your primary focus is on finding a partner, it takes away from the deeper relationship that you cultivate with God. You start to put all of your hopes and dreams of fulfillment in another person instead of seeking fulfillment in God and in yourself. It leads to spiritual frustration because you start believing that God's plan for you is incomplete. You start to become frustrated with God, maybe even bitter. And you can get to a point where this longing for a relationship becomes more important than trusting in God's timing. It also leads to constant comparison, because when you're obsessing over a relationship, you start to compare yourself to everyone else. You start to wonder, well, if this woman didn't have the holiest of dating lives, if she didn't wait until a marriage, if she did this and did that, why is she happily married and I'm not? you start to get on social media, you scroll through the happy couples and all of that, and you start to believe that there's something about you that's lacking. Instead of doing all of that, I really want you to be, I really want you to see this episode as a call to be sober minded. So, Paul talks about this in 1 Peter 5 and 8. He warns us of the importance of being sober minded and watchful because the enemy is prowling and seeking to devour us. And, I was thinking about this again, even as I was watching the Rapture Talk videos, that, even if you believe that the rapture is biblical, which, again, I personally don't, but if you believe that, the Bible does clearly say that no man knows the hour, right? And if you allowed yourself to believe in this, it is a sign that you still have some discernment work to do about what sources to trust and when you are truly listening to God and not something distracting from the enemy. Because talking about the enemy destroying and devouring us, I think that is what's going to happen with some of these people who were, I keep wanting to sing Anita Baker, Caught Up in the Rapture, but who were caught up in this. Give me a second to drink some water. Okay. So this whole idea of how some of these people are going to be destroyed because they have put all their faith and hope in this and they truly believed it was going to happen. When it doesn't, there are some people who are going to go back to their normal lives and they're going to be completely fine, right? It's going to be disappointing, but yeah, whatever. There are going to be people who are going to freaking crash out tomorrow on Wednesday, or they may crash out on Thursday, right? Because they put so much hope and weight into this and then it didn't happen. And it's the same with romantic relationships. You can become consumed to the point where if you aren't vigilant, what should be a natural desire, for companionship becomes a really unhealthy longing. And desire is a beautiful thing. I believe that desire is a gift from God, right? And I think we should lean into that desire. I don't think that God is a tease. I don't think that he puts desires in our heart for no reason. I think desiring love and companionship and a godly relationship are natural, beautiful things. I think that those things have so much power to improve your life and make you happier. But they have to be put in their proper place. They cannot be all consuming. And they cannot lead you to spend every moment of the day, every hour of the day, worrying about the how and the when of it. Again, just like Rapture Talk, the whole no man knows the hour. Like, if you spend all your time obsessing over when there's going to be a second coming, when there's going to be a resurrection, then you're not living your life on earth the way you should. You're not living in your purpose, doing the things that God wants you to do and fulfill, because you're so busy. You're so spiritually obsessed that you're no longer earthly good. So we're called to live with hope and patience, even as we wait for the things that God has promised for our lives. And I want to talk about what it looks like to still have this longing and still have this desire without allowing it to turn into obsession. So, the first thing that you need to do is get really rooted in your identity. Like, you are already fearfully and wonderfully made. You've already been chosen. You're already loved. And regardless of your relationship status, you're already accepted by God. You're not looking for a romantic partner to make you complete. You're looking for a romantic partner to add on to the already great life that you have. You also need to cultivate some patience and trust in God's timing. And I know that's difficult, right? Um, I got married later than I thought I would. And not just romantic relationships, there are plenty of things in my life. When I look back on them, I think about how I really wanted those things and I thought they would happen at a certain time, and they happen at later times. And when I look back on them, I get it. I understand. I can clearly see how there were some things that I wasn't ready for, I wasn't mature enough for, and there was work that I had to do on myself before I could handle those things without sabotaging, right? Or I could see how delaying one desire allowed me to have time for other desires to come into fruition. Again, I think about, you know, marriage, and I also think about my career before I became a coach, and how I think if I had gotten married earlier, I wouldn't have accomplished some of the things that I ended up accomplishing in that career. So I was able to get certain awards, get certain recognitions, and be really focused on that before I met my husband. And not that being married has kept me from accomplishing things, but I do think that, when I look back on it, I think God allowed me to really create a really firm foundation for myself before I got married. So it is so important that you allow yourself to trust in God's timing. And also, back to what I said about how you don't need a romantic partner to be complete. You really have to create a full and abundant life. Don't wait until you have a partner to save up money, to pursue your career goals, to travel, to have fun. Because once the right partner comes into your life, he is going to add on to those things and make them more fun, make them greater. But he's not going to be your entire life. You also need to guard yourself against comparison. If that means that maybe you spend less time with some of the people in your life who have the relationships and all that, and maybe start finding more single friends that you can relate to. Maybe that means you spend less time on social media. Do what you need to do, but also remind yourself all the time that another person's journey is not yours. And you also need to just anchor yourself. Anchor yourself in God through prayer, through meditation, through scripture. Remind yourself of his promises. Remind yourself of, again, his faithfulness in your life. And also ground yourself in your own greatness as well. Remind yourself that you are a woman on a mission, a woman with a purpose. And yes, it might be taking a little bit longer to find the right partner, but part of that is because Nothing about you is taken lightly, right? So everything has to be above and beyond. And sometimes, like, those above and beyond things take a little bit longer. So I want you to remember that desiring a relationship is not wrong. In fact, it's a beautiful thing. But you cannot allow that longing to drive you into obsession. You are called to have hope and patience, not fear and anxiety. And this is your reminder to stay grounded and to trust that God has his best for you in mind. You are already worthy. You're already secure. And just know that the desires that you are asking for out of life, that even greater than you can imagine, is on its way if you would just trust in that. So if you need the help and the accountability and learning how to go after relationships with discernment, with intention, while also staying grounded, I would love to help you with that. You can join my coaching program. It's called From Toxic to Thriving. And if you are listening to the podcast, there's a link to it in the show notes. If you are listening on YouTube, because I always post it as a video, but it's really just the audio and like a graphic. At some point I should do like a real legit video podcast, but anyways, if you're listening on YouTube, in the description there's a link with how to work with me. But yeah, I don't want you to feel like you have to be passive. There's so much value in being intentional about your desires, right? And knowing how to have a plan, have the accountability, have someone who's going to help you with the healing and all of that and the strategy of dating. Because, I do both. We talk about healing from the past and identifying the unhealthy patterns, but we also talk about like actual strategy for getting out there and meeting the right person. So there's nothing wrong with setting a goal. There's nothing wrong with being intentional about it. But like I've been talking about this entire episode, it has to all be put in its proper place. So yeah, reach out to me. Let's talk about what that looks like to work together. And in the meantime, just in general, like Rapture Talk has been crazy, right? But just in general, the world has been very frenetic, very frenzied the past few weeks, the past few months. Take some time to rest. You deserve it. And we all deserve it. With everything crazy happening in the world, I think everyone could just use a really great nap right now. So get some rest. I love you so much. Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by Contessa Digital.